The Mariners are officially in on the 4 big shortstops set to hit free agency in the coming weeks. We'll be breaking down some of Scott Service, Justin Hollander, and Jerry DePoto's comments from yesterday's end-of-season press conference here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Thursday, October 20th, 2022. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. On the show today, we'll be going over some of the biggest notes from yesterday's end-of-season press conference for the Mariners, including the Mariners' official declaration that they're in on the free agent shortstop market, why Jesse Winker was away from the team during the postseason, and more. But first, we got to start with some fairly breaking news that came out about an hour or so ago. Most of you have probably already seen it, but Rawlings today announced the finalists for all the Gold Glove awards, and the Mariners have one finalist at catcher. Cal Raleigh, yes, Big Dumper, has been nominated as one of the 3 finalists for the Gold Glove Award in the American League for catchers, along with Sean Murphy of the A's and Jose Trevino of the Yankees. So, Colby, what do you think about old Big Dumper's chances of taking home some hardware here?
Pretty good, but probably not going to happen. I would assume. I would assume that the Yankee is going to win it because the Yankees just win everything when it comes to these big awards. Derek Jeter has a Gold Glove. So, yeah.
Multiple, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yes. The worst defensive shortstop in the Hall of Fame has Gold Gloves. So, and it's not even that qualifier. One of the worst defensive shortstops of all time has multiple Gold Gloves because he's a Yankee. So, yeah, I'd probably say Trevino is probably the favorite, and Murphy's already won it once, so it's not going to be an easy, an easy mountain to climb for Cal Raleigh. But he was great. He ranks very highly in the framing metrics. He was, I think, first or second in the American League in caught stealing throughout 27, 28 guys. It's just he was great at blocking the ball and all that. And it doesn't hurt that he had an amazing offensive season, because as much as we want to pretend that the Gold Glove is all about defense, we know it's not. And I can tell you that just by pointing to Luis Arraez, who was nominated for first base Gold Glove. And I think he only played 65 games there. So, yeah, offense matters when the Gold Glove conversation, and I think Raleigh might have had the best year out of any of them. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I know Trevino was an all-star, and Murphy's obviously very good, but I still think Cal was probably the best bat amongst them. But if I had to guess, I would probably say Cal finishes third, and it really has nothing to do with the merit of his argument. It's just because I think one's a Yankee and the other one's already won a Gold Glove, so that's pretty much all that she wrote.
Well, and also, if you want to go by Fangraph's defensive WAR, which it's hit or miss for the most part, Jose Trevino was number 1 in all of Major League Baseball with plus 29. Cal was second, but at plus 18. So that's a pretty steep cliff there. He was tied with JT Realmuto of the Phillies. Sean Murphy was all the way down at 6 with 15. Jonah Heim, who wasn't nominated, actually finished ahead of Murphy by 0.1. But
right.
Yeah, so
reputation.
If they're going by Fangraph's defensive WAR, which they're not, but if they're going by that, Raleigh would be second.
Yeah, a few years ago they let the SIS whatever thing just basically hand out the awards for them. I don't think they're doing that again this year. I think it's back to like a vote of some kind. So I think they only did that for the COVID season. So, it is what it is. I don't care that much about Gold Gloves. It'd be cool if Cal won one. He'd be the first Mariner catcher to win one. Which, Mariners don't have a super long history of like elite defensive catchers, but Dan Wilson never won one. When he retired, I don't know if it's still true, Dan Wilson had the highest fielding percentage of any catcher in Major League Baseball history. I don't know if that's still true. Yes. Now, granted, catchers don't, a pass ball I don't think is an error or anything like that. So, it's they don't throw to bases that often. So, but yeah, he was there, and then Zanino. So Raleigh is definitely deserving to be here. It's a bummer that Eugenio Suarez didn't get nominated. I feel like he's definitely deserving, especially when you look at Ramon Urias. Really, we're doing that. But then again, hey, Luis Urias was nominated at first base, and he didn't even play that much first base relative to the rest of the candidates. So yeah, Gold Glove awards are probably the least valuable award they give out, just because they're hardly ever about defense. They're almost always about the bat.
Let's see here. So I'm trying to see if you're right about Dan Wilson. I don't think I put in the right settings in here for that, so that'll be something that I'll look at later. But yeah, going back to what you were saying about what they were using during the COVID season, that was the Sabre Defensive Index. And looking at the defensive index, the last time it was updated, they've rarely updated. It takes forever for them to update it. The last time that they updated it was August 28th, and Trevino was number one in Sabre Defensive Index rating at plus 11.1. Adley Rutschman was number 2 at plus 7, and then Raleigh was number 3 at plus 6.7. So,
So he's definitely deserving to be nominated. And like, I don't like when I say he'll probably go to the Yankee, I don't mean that's because he doesn't deserve it. That's just kind of how these awards go. If the Yankees nominated, yeah, they typically get it.
Yeah. So, and then you were talking about Ramon Urias. He only played 98 games at third base this year. Like,
I mean, let's be honest, the award's going to Chapman anyways, but like, come on.
Which is silly too, because he had like his worst defensive year. It was still a good year, but like relative to Matt Chapman, he was not like he was not a surefire like Gold Glove, even Platinum Glove like contender like he typically has been in the past. Like he was fine this year. Made some good plays, made some highlights, all that stuff, but just not like the defensive numbers that we come to expect from Matt Chapman.
I feel like we spent way too long on the Gold Glove stuff.
Yeah, well, we do have stuff to talk about from the press conferences, but I think all of it is like pretty quick. But there's obviously some stuff about the middle infield market. Jesse Winker, there's a little bit of an update. The Mariners given their side of the story on that front. Most of it just kind of dancing around the question, but I think there is a couple of interesting nuggets on that. And some other stuff on the pitching, how they're going to approach pitching in the off season. So we'll get into all that real quick, though. Just want to remind you that this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Roan. We all know that when you look good, you feel good, but sometimes looking good means putting on uncomfortable fitting clothes that don't breathe and limit your mobility. The dress shirt in particular was due for a radical reinvention, and Roan stepped up to the challenge. Roan's commuter shirt is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man, and here's why. Firstly, mobility is everything. Roan's comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way. Secondly, looking good is easy with Roan styles. It's time to feel confident with a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle. With Roan's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's that easy. And thirdly, let's talk about Roan's odor-free tech. With Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Roan is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I received a commuter shirt from Roan, and I got to tell you, it's one of the most comfortable things I've ever put on my body, and the commuter shirt can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to roan.com/lockedon and use promo code LOCKEDON to save 20% off your order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/lockedon and use promo code LOCKEDON. It's time to find your corner office comfort. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listens. Colby, let's get into these comments from Justin Hollander, Scott Service, and Jerry DePoto, who held their end-of-season press conference yesterday at T-Mobile Park. And they talked about a lot of stuff. There's some injury news. There's some talk on the off-season approach, just some reflection on the year. But let's start with Jesse Winker, actually, because this was something that we talked about a lot on yesterday's episode. Ryan Divish, of course, went across he did some radio hits, talked about Jesse Winker in a really negative light, basically painting him as as being more or less lazy this during this season, and that wore thin on teammates. And of course, on top of that, there were some there was obviously the note on him not being at for the or he wasn't present for the postseason for the Mariners at all for any of the games. He was apparently invited to Game 3 of the ALDS, wasn't there, but the Mariners have clarified why that was. Jesse was apparently in New York getting a knee procedure done, and is set to have a neck procedure done as well, and basically just said this is being blown out of proportion. That Jesse had been dealing with especially the knee situation, and apparently that really was impacting him as the season went along, and it got worse as the season went along. And so that, going hand in hand with just his overall struggles at the plate and his overall frustrations, kind of led to everything that happened. And they seemed like they were pretty open to the idea of him coming back in 2023. But do you think that's just, protecting the player, protecting the relationship, not, giving away too much information? Or do you think that's actually a valid point here, and that maybe this is being overblown a little bit?
Nothing that Scott Service, Jerry Dipoto, or Justin Hollander said yesterday matters at all. It doesn't. Because you could tell me, oh, well, he was getting the knee operation in New York. That's why he wasn't at the playoff thing. Couldn't have waited 3 days to get the knee operation? Of course he could have. He didn't want to be there. That's why he wasn't there. It's that simple. Scott's expecting Scott Service to throw a player under the bus after, that player had basically gotten thrown under the bus by himself. I mean, let's be honest, but Divish's reports kind of bring that out to light. He's not going to sit there and go like, well, yeah, Divish nailed it. Like, Jesse's got a lot of things to work on, and he was just bad this year, and we don't like him anymore. He's not going to say that. So the only thing that was said yesterday that really carries any weight to me whatsoever is just the injury updates. I don't care about anything else. Jesse Winker was bad, and the Mariners aren't going to sit here and say he's bad, because they're not going to do that. Why? Because the Mariners never throw their players under the bus, right? They don't do that. It's bad business to throw players under the bus unless they do something that is, outside of the scope of baseball, that is so terrible that you have no choice but to do that. So, the whole like, oh, well, Jesse really wasn't with us because he was having the knee surgery. He could have done that at any time this offseason. If he had waited 3 days, it wouldn't have mattered. Jesse Winker wasn't in uniform as part of the taxi squad or whatever. He wasn't on the line for introductions. He wasn't there because he didn't want to be. That's a fact, period. There's no reason he had to get the knee done when he did. So let's just use common sense here. He wasn't there because he didn't want to be. Do I believe Scott when he says, oh, yeah, no, we think Jesse could be a part of our plans in the future? Sure. Because we talked about that. That makes sense, that there's a scenario where Jesse Winker does make sense coming back to the Mariners. So, no, I think that's just protecting a player. I don't see any value to the idea that, oh, no, he really stuck his neck out for Jesse Winker. No, he didn't. He just did what he would do with any player. So, no, I don't think Divish made that up, which is more or less kind of what Scott was saying. Scott and Jerry and Justin is, well, we're not calling Divish a liar, but like he doesn't have the whole story, and they're not wrong. Divish doesn't have the whole story, but I still trust Ryan Divish on that front, without question. There's an issue in the clubhouse with Jesse Winker, and that's not something that the Mariners can ignore. They can pretend to ignore it, but they're not going to.
Yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder if, because I would assume that whoever told Divish about this stuff, and maybe it's also just him using his eyes and his ears, right? But I would assume whoever maybe gave him a little bit of a window into what's going on there and how the clubhouse feels about Jesse was a player. But how much of that is just the player's own personal feelings, and how much of that is actually reflective of how the entire clubhouse feels towards Jesse? So who knows? At the end of the day, we're not there. We don't know, and we're never going to know. We're never going to know what the full story is. We with these situations, but I think at the end of the day, I think what Scott Service and company were saying yesterday about Jesse in particular was just kind of protecting the player, because like you said, they're not going to throw guys under the bus. That's what good teams do. That's what respectful organizations do. They don't air out dirty laundry to the public, especially in those kinds of settings.
Right. Not to mention, if you go out and say, yeah, this guy's a clubhouse problem, what are the odds anybody's going to trade for him? 0.
That's true too. Right. And like, that's the other thing, Jerry saying like, we think that Jesse's a great hitter and that he's going to be able to get back on track next year. Part of that is also, probably trying to sell it to other teams that are going to be,
or at least
trade for him.
Or at least not giving the other teams the ammunition to be like, well, even you think he's a bad hitter now. Like,
yeah,
it's just about protecting the player and protecting your asset too. Because as much as we don't want to think about players as assets, they are.
Right. So, at the end, because we talked about it yesterday that, you right now as things stand, if you're going to trade Jesse Winker, you're probably not going to get anything that's really that valuable in return for him, and you're probably going to have to eat some of that $8.25 million that he's owed this year. So, you got to try to protect that as much as possible if you know that you are more than likely going to be trading him this offseason. So, I don't think really what they said at in the end matters too much. But yeah, so the one thing to take away from that though is that there was a knee injury that was impacting him throughout the course of the year, and then the next neck thing started to crop up towards the end of the year, and so that certainly allows us to kind of understand at least a little bit of what's going on, or what was going on with him this year, and why he wasn't performing to the peak of his potential. So some other injury notes. Andres Munoz is having a foot procedure done. This was apparently a thing that was impacting him for a good portion of this season. And because of this, they are likely not going to ramp him up in spring training until a little bit later on into spring training, Jerry said. So he might get a late start once we're in spring training, and that shouldn't alarm anyone. It seems like he's still on track to be ready for the regular season, but he just might get into the swing of things a little bit later. But not really anything of concern, it seems. Cal Raleigh, they confirmed he has a torn UCL in his thumb, has a piece of the bone chipped off. He's going to see a hand specialist. I think Cal right now is on vacation and doing stuff right now, though, and then he'll get all that taken care of, but I don't think there's anything that's impacting him. And then JP Crawford was also dealing with a knee issue, but he wasn't one of the big injuries that Jerry talked about. He said anything else that he didn't mention was minor, and then later on he mentioned the knee issue for Crawford, so I assume that was minor. So speaking of JP, that was kind of the big thing, or JP was kind of involved in the big thing or the big takeaway from the press conference, that the Mariners more or less officially declared that they are going to be in on the big free agents at shortstop. But Jerry said ideally the plan is for them to add a shortstop who is willing to move to second base, because JP Crawford is their shortstop. Now, that's likely just him saying that to say that, right? Just like, JP's our guy because JP is the one that's there, and they haven't made any decisions, and they haven't actually, gotten into negotiations as far as we know with any of these shortstops. But should we read more into that, Colby? Is he doing the same thing as last year, and that JP is just guaranteed the shortstop role? Because I don't think that should be the case at all. I don't think JP should be guaranteed that role whatsoever. Or is this just, saying it for the sake of saying it?
I hate this part of the offseason. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he said, well, we hope one of these shortstops will play second. Who cares if he says that or if he doesn't say that? Who cares?
But like last year, like it was a real thing. Like they were not willing to move JP Crawford off a shortstop for
if it's a real thing this year, they should all be fired. Like, it's that simple. You do not leave talent on the table for JP freaking Crawford. So yeah, if one of them's willing to move to second base, great. Now we can keep JP happy. And by the way, if it means that much to JP, you should trade him. It's a position, all right? It's shortstop versus second base. And by the way, you're going to have to pay one of these guys to be your shortstop as if he is your shortstop. So if you're paying for a second baseman like he's a shortstop, you're losing money on that end of the deal. You just are. So I don't care. He's ideally, yeah. Well, great, Jerry. What if Carlos Correa comes to you and says, yeah, I'll sign, but I'm only going to play shortstop? You really think Jerry DePoe is going to be like, wow, sorry, you have to play second base? Of course he's not. Of course he's not. And the fact that he didn't come out yesterday and just say, JP is our shortstop, end of story. He didn't, right? He left it open. He said, well, ideally you play second base, but we'll see. Like, that is a wishy-washy. That is a way of saying like, oh, well, we trust JP to be our shortstop. While acknowledging that he has to get better there. He knows that. He knows he has to get better up the middle. And again, I don't know what people are expecting. Like, yes, JP will be our second baseman. We're absolutely going to go get a better shortstop than JP Crawford. You don't know that. He doesn't know that, right? He doesn't have any idea if he's going to be able to land a shortstop better than JP Crawford. They're out there, and the fact that he's acknowledged that, yeah, there's some guys out there that we're really interested in. And he wouldn't say specifically like, oh, and they're going to play second base. He said ideally they'd play second. But remember last year? Last year was Trevor Story. If he's signing here, it's to play second base, period. End of story. We knew that. He didn't say that this time. So I don't care. The whole idea that like, oh, because he didn't 100% say JP Crawford has to play second base next year, it means that they're not going to go after one of the shortstops. He literally said the opposite. They're interested. They're in. And if one of those guys wants to play second or is willing to play second, they probably get the priority. Are any of those guys going to be willing to play second? I mean, maybe Trey Turner since he's already done it, but I think that's it. I really don't see Xander Bogaerts or Dansby Swanson or Carlos Correa going like, yeah, I'm sure I'll move to second base for JP Crawford. Come on. Like, Crawford's not even that good. Let's just call it what it is. JP Crawford is an above average defensive shortstop. He's a at best league average bat, and that's when everything's going well for him, which it wasn't for the last 3 months for the regular season. And maybe that's the knee issue. He had a pec issue that he was also dealing with, but JP Crawford's not a good hitter. He's average, right? He's pretty much an average player across the board. He's a good player. He's a useful player. He's a valuable player. He's not a player that Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander are going to look, Carlos Correa dead in the eyes and say, well, you have to play second base or we're not going to give you this money, even though you're willing to sign a market value deal with us. And all we had to do is move JP over. And again, if JP has a problem with that, he's a bad teammate. He's not the captain you think he is if he has a problem with that. So I don't care about anything that those guys said yesterday. I don't. Do you think they're going to come out and say, oh, well, we plan on being very aggressive on Carlos Correa or Dansby Swanson? Of course they're not. Of course they're not.
No, but I think saying that, hey, we are really interested in their market, I think that does mean something, because you don't just publicly say that if that's not actually true. If you don't actually think that you can feasibly land one of those guys, I think that is important to say that, because, we know, like, even though that they're not supposed to be talking to agents and all that, let's be real about it. They are. They have talked about it. They have set those expectations because that's what good business is. And so in those preliminary discussions, I think that they have been, told that these guys have interest in coming to Seattle, at least a couple of them. So they think that they have at least a decent chance to land one of them, because why else say that to the public? Why set expectations if you don't know? So, and Jerry, I know Jerry sometimes gets into a whole thing of, saying too much. And, the Mariners fan base kind of dislikes that side of Jerry, because he is very open. He's a lot more open than a lot of other general managers or, baseball execs. But at the end of the day, like, I think him saying that means that they actually have some information there, that they are in the running, that there is a legitimate chance that they can land one of those guys.
I don't think Jerry, I think the part that people are kind of freaking out about is the, like, what he said, best case scenario, ideal scenario, whatever terminology he used, is we get one of those shortstop who wants to play second. And I think people are looking at that and saying like, oh, so that is a public commitment to JP Crawford at shortstop. A, it's not. And B, who cares? Like, you realize Jerry can say, oh yeah, we think JP's our shortstop, and then sign, Xander Bogaerts and be like, well, JP's a great teammate. We think he'll be great at second base, and Xander just helps us more at shortstop, blah, blah, blah. Like, of course he can change direction. It's not that hard. So I don't like it when people take everything that's said at this type of press conference as gospel. And honestly, nothing was really said that surprises me. So yeah, I don't, these type of press conferences, they bug me, because nothing gets said and yet everything gets blown out of proportion. Everything gets, its own segment, right? Is, oh, we got to go over each and every one of the comments with a fine tooth comb and figure out what's real and what's not. Just assume none of it's real. Like, what happened yesterday that changed anybody's thought about how the Mariners might approach the offseason? Anything?
All right, let's just talk about the pitching here. So the he was asked about the pitching. Jesus, he was asked about the pitching, and and because obviously, and this is going to be something that you and I talk about a lot over the course of the offseason, the fact that they had just remarkable health in the rotation. They only used like 6 or 7 pitchers throughout the entire season. As the phone is going off, that's lovely. This show is going off the rails right now. So yeah, he acknowledged Jerry specifically acknowledged the remarkable health and all that, and how that's likely not going to continue in 2023, that they're going to have to safeguard themselves. So firstly, he mentioned Emerson Hancock, Taylor Dollard, Bryce Miller, and Brian Wu as part of the 2023 depth for the starting rotation. So that's interesting that Brian Wu was mentioned along with those guys, because he's someone that just started pitching this past season. And then he also mentioned guys like Adam Macko, but more so in terms of like in the future, down the road type of thing, not really next year. But he said that pitching is not their first focus this offseason. It's going to be about the lineup, which we knew, right? Yeah. Like that makes the most sense. Pitching is their strength right now. They need to get better offensively, so that's going to fall on the back burner. I don't think that necessarily rules out adding another, number 5 starter type to compete with Marco Gonzalez or Chris Flexen if he sticks around. There is some thought that I believe it was an Athletic article. I saw something on Twitter that said that Flexen might actually be willing to opt in if the Mariners are willing to trade him to somewhere that he can actually compete for a starting job. So
right, I saw that. I didn't read the whole thing, but there was basically the idea was that several playoff contenders apparently approached the Mariners eager to trade for Chris Flexen this summer, and the Mariners, because they didn't really have the rotation depth, decided they needed a safeguard, and so they kept Flexen. But I think there was an idea that maybe you could actually pair Flexen and in a good prospect and get a big upgrade in your lineup out of it, is basically the idea.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, like, they need to do something with the rotation, because they cannot just rely on all of their guys to stay healthy, especially at the top of the rotation. Like, they need guys that can make spot starts. And, Jerry said, like, there aren't going to be a lot of guys that are interested in coming here and being relievers and just kind of waiting for the opportunity to start. And that's true.
Yep.
Like, they're not going to be able to sign, the equivalent of Tyler Anderson or whatever, and just stash him in the bullpen until, like, an injury crops up. Like, guys aren't going to be jumping for joy to do that in free agency. But, there's going to be obviously some minor league ads that are made. I'm just really interested to see how they kind of handle the whole Marco Gonzalez, Chris Flexen situation. If Flexen does opt in, is that automatic that they do trade him? Or do they go to Flexen and say, hey, we're actually trying to trade Marco Gonzalez, and if we trade him, then you're probably going to be our number 5, at least to start the season, which...
I hope they do better.
Yeah, I really hope that they do better than Marco or Flexen. The Marco situation is going to be really interesting, because he's going to start to make a little bit of money now that he's in that part of his contract extension.
Right.
And so they might need to eat a little bit of that in order to trade him. They're probably not going to get something really valuable for him. But if they don't foresee him as someone that can improve and get out of this little funk that he's been in the last couple of years, and they don't think that he can give them any value out of the bullpen, then he needs to go, right? Like, because they're not going to just waste a roster spot on Marco Gonzalez. They're not going to do that with the position that they're in right now.
No.
And with the upside of guys like Emerson Hancock, Taylor Dollard, Bryce Miller, etc., like, they're probably going to prefer to give those guys opportunities over someone like Marco, because I mean, look what George Kirby did for you this year. Look what Logan Gilbert's been able to do for you right out of the gate. Like,
I mean, expecting that from any of those other guys is a lot, but Hancock's just, I feel like there's like this idea that Hancock is just going to like explode onto the scene like Kirby and Gilbert kind of did, but I don't think he's that guy, at least not yet. Things could change. It's a long way to spring training, and we'll certainly see him in spring training. Did you find it interesting at all that he didn't mention, or at least I didn't hear him mention Matt Brash as possibly being
so he was asked
start.
about
Did
it.
he
He was asked about it. So he said that ideally he doesn't really think that there's going to be a path for him to start right now as things currently stand. But he said that if we move away pitching pieces, that could be an option for him. But he thinks that Matt really likes coming out of the bullpen. And he talked about how he had a similar discussion with Edwin Diaz. And that, it just seems like it might be for the best for Matt to pitch out of the bullpen.
Sure. I just kind of wonder if that's not like a precursor to be like, we might move him. Like, you know what I mean? Because the bullpen's in really good shape. And obviously Brash is a big part of that. And he would be going forward as well. But the fact that you're like not even considering, like, you're not even telling him like, hey, stretch yourself out. You never know. You might be a starter for us again. To me, that means that they might be going around shopping Matt Brash as like a high leverage reliever, a young, controllable high leverage reliever. And they might be going like, he likes pitching out of the bullpen. He's great there. You know, he's got all these like, I don't know. And that's going to be worth something, especially to contenders. High leverage arms are expensive. Did Brash do enough to be a high leverage arm? To be considered a high leverage arm? I think he maybe did, right? I like, he pitched in a lot of big spots and he came through more times than not. So I don't know, just interesting to see what they decide to do with Brash. I think he's kind of one of those like surprise, could get traded type of things. Maybe it's for a rotation arm. Maybe it's for a corner outfielder, or maybe Jerry DePoto and Scott Service and Justin Hollander. Maybe he's their next Edwin Diaz. There's nothing wrong with that. If they decide to keep Brash and kind of build the bullpen around him and Munoz, great. Like there's no wrong answer with what to do with Matt Brash. I just thought it was interesting that he more or less was like, no, Matt Brash isn't a starting pitcher. So
yeah, like he didn't rule it out, but he kind of ruled it out. So
it was a lot of GM speak. Like
a lot of GM speak. He still controlled that press conference, by the way. Like Justin did speak, but like it was Jerry's show. It was Jerry's show. Yeah.
It's going to be like it's just like when Jed Hoyer and Theo did a press conference, right? Theo spoke, and Jed mostly sat there and nodded, like, "Yep." Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's Jerry is still very much in control of this organization, but Justin is going to play a massive role, and he already has. So
yeah, Justin is also nowhere near as open as Jerry is when it comes to speaking about stuff. Justin is very much like rehearsed,
kind of old
just
school.
normal GM speak. Yeah, he's just like, he was asked about, how do you want to build this offense, and like, what's something like you think that you need to add to the offense, and he's like, yeah, he was just like, the thing that I learned from Jerry is that there isn't one way to build an offense, so we're gonna be open to everything. And I'm like, okay, all right, cool. So I can fast forward through this part.
We're gonna get in the room with our guys. We're gonna grind it out, turn over every stone. Yeah. And try and get creative as a way to, build out the rest of this offense. It's like, okay.
And, we're in on everything. Yeah.
Yeah. 100 yards, 100 yards, 53 and a half by 53 and a whatever, blah, 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 all that nonsense. Yep.
No time to sleep.
Yeah. That's why I love these type of press conferences. I watch every single one, even the Pete Carroll ones. Like, oh man, you learn so much from these.
I mean, we're fired up. We're jacked up.
Yeah. So I think like synopsis, there were some injuries that are getting taken care of. We're open to adding one of the shortstops. We'd like them to be second baseman, but ... Yeah, pitching probably going to look pretty similar to what we saw last year. And to wrap it all up, but we're open to everything. We're open to anything. So
we're open to anything. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Typical press conference for the most part. Also, the bulk comment. Of course, the bulk of the roster is already the 2023 roster is already here. Like, of course, like if they add 6 new players, right? If they bring back 20 players, that's bulk, and you still added a significant amount of there's still a significant amount of turnover there. If you just add 6 new players,
like 75% is a bulk. Right, but 25% turnover is still massive. It's still big. Yeah. So, I don't know. Like, did people honestly think that the Mariners are going to bring in like 18 new guys? Like,
Well, there were definitely people that were like, oh God, they're doing nothing. They're going to do nothing. They're already setting us up for that.
And that's why I hate these press conferences more than anything, because those people find their way into our comment section on YouTube, and they find our way into Twitter, and we get to deal with them. And we're going to have to deal with you guys enough eventually anyways, because we'll get to that later. We're not announcing that today, but
yeah, no, we're not announcing that. No, you are not. I am holding off on that as long as I possibly can.
Then you better mute my mic, because here it comes.
No,
but that's the main reason I don't like these press conferences, because everybody just like every little word he says is instead of if, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, it's a federal investigation. It's like, let's calm down. Let's see how the offseason plays out. We will react to every bit of news, every rumor, every idea that you can possibly think of. We will react to it. I'm just not ready to freak out on October 20th because Jerry said if the shortstop is willing to move to second base, not he has to. Like, oh my God, we have to stop the presses for that. Please don't. Please
JP
don't.
Crawford is guaranteed to be the 2023 starting shortstop for the Mariners. Yeah. All right. So we're done with that. I know. Yeah, I know. I know. You made it very clear that you did not want to talk about this, and I expected that. It's on me. It's on me at the end of the day. Yesterday, I know that we said that, or I know that I said we were going to do more awards, but the press conference happened after we recorded Locked On. I didn't know that was going down yesterday, so that kind of changed things for us. And so we'll get back to doing awards tomorrow. But yeah, for now, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.